Hush now. Settle your hearts and prepare your spirit, for we stand at a precipice. The hall, it was still, brothers and sisters, heavy, yes, heavy with the dust of centuries, thick with the unsaid rules and the unspoken agreements of a world built upon our backs. Then, beloved, one voice cut through, like a clarion call, like thunder rolling across the plains of the Sahel itself. A young man, Ibrahim Traoré, stood before the gathered powers of this world, and he leaned in. His words were not a request. They were not a polite preamble or a timid diplomatic note. They were a verdict, unflinching, deliberate. He spoke, and in that single profound declaration, the brittle silence of centuries cracked wide open. He said, "Listen up, because I'm only going to say this once." My friends, that was not just a sentence. That was a rupture in history. It was the sound of a continent standing up straight, rejecting the role written for it by others. It was a declaration that black sovereignty is not a negotiable concept. It is the very foundation of freedom. Stay with me, saints. We need to dissect this moment to understand the fire behind his words and the dark shadow of the threat he faced. Before we delve into the core of this matter, if you believe in the power of truth and the dignity of the African spirit, please hit that subscribe button right now. Do it for the generations who need to hear this message, and ring the notification bell so you won't miss a single word of the gospel of freedom. My beloved audience, let us transport ourselves back into that room. The air was not merely heavy, it was suffocating, thick with the unaddressed grievances of 1,400,000,000 souls. This young military man, Captain Traoré, stood there. But he did not speak merely as the president of Burkina Faso. No, he was the vessel for a continental cry that had been muted for generations. He understood, brethren, that the game of global politics is often played in hushed tones and polite evasions. But he chose a different pulpit. He chose to speak plain, hard truth. And what was the truth? That for too long, Africa's dignity has been treated like a currency, negotiated away for loans, for aid packages, for access. This age, he declared, that age of submission, it is over. But behind the righteous fire of his defiance, there was a darker narrative unfolding, a shadow looming large. We must address the spark that truly turned this tension into an inferno. Reports began to surface, whispered through the gilded halls of diplomacy, of a threatening message, an ultimatum from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, whether that message was written down with ink on paper or merely implied through cold diplomatic channels matters less than the audacity of the assumption itself. Hear me now. The true scandal was not the message's authenticity. The true scandal was the sheer arrogance, the presumption that a continent, vast and rich with $2.5 trillion in economic potential, could still be intimidated, could still be treated like a chess piece on someone else's global board. It is the same old arrogance wrapped in a new, slick package. And Traoré's response? Oh, it was swift. It was sharp. It was a line drawn in the ancient, sacred soil of Africa. He sent a clear message echoing beyond Ouagadougou, across the sands of the Sahel, and into the very financial centers of New York and London. He declared, simply and fundamentally, Africa does not negotiate under threats. We, the people of the diaspora, we understand this principle deep in our bones. We have seen the masters of the game try to use fear, try to use deprivation, try to use sanctions as their primary tool of diplomacy. But what they fail to grasp is that when you threaten a man who has already lost everything but his honor, you only sharpen his resolve. When you threaten a continent that has endured the Berlin Conference of 1884 and the systematic stripping of its resources for over a century, you do not inspire fear. You ignite an unstoppable, unifying flame. Think about the sheer, undeniable weight of what was at stake. When Captain Traoré refused that implied threat, He was rejecting the entire global financial order that permits the theft of Africa's potential. He was saying no to the illicit financial flows, the tax evasion, and the unfair trade practices that steal an estimated $88 billion $88 billion from Africa every single year. That money, brothers and sisters, is not an abstraction. That is money siphoned out of our schools, out of our hospitals, out of the pockets of our mothers and fathers who are simply trying to build an honest life. It is the money that could lift millions from poverty and finance the future without a single cent of foreign debt. This is the very essence of the struggle for black sovereignty. It is not just about a flag or a name on a presidential palace. It is about economic control. It is the right to manage your gold, your oil, and your people's potential for your benefit, not for the short-term stability of some distant foreign capital. So, the question hanging heavy in that silent chamber, the question that must hang heavy in your heart right now is this: when a man, when a nation, when a continent stands up and demands nothing more than the control of its own destiny, when it refuses to be treated as a colony or a vault, what price, what ultimate, final price, will the global powers demand for that sacred act of self-possession? We stand at the edge, my friends. The gauntlet has been thrown down. The refusal to kneel has been declared. But when a giant finally refuses to bow, how long before the powers that rely upon its knees choose to answer not with words, but with cold, hard pressure designed to make the ground beneath that giant tremble? The stillness of that chamber, beloved, could not contain the earthquake the president of Burkina Faso had just set off. The gauntlet was down, and the world waited to see if this was just youthful bravado or the authentic roar of a truly awakened continent. Traoré's next words did not just address the diplomatic corps. They were a sermon preached to every soul scarred by centuries of exploitation. He declared, with the unwavering conviction of a man possessed by historical purpose, "We are not your colony, we are sovereign." My friends, stop and reflect on the power of that statement. It was not merely aimed at Tel Aviv or Washington or Brussels. It was aimed at every capital that had ever viewed Africa as a vault to be plundered, as a chessboard to be manipulated, or as a field to be planted with seeds of division. This is where the righteous anger must rise in our spirits. We must confront the facts that fueled his fury. The old colonial masters may have left their flags, but they left behind a financial structure, a new, softer, but no less suffocating colonial grip. This grip, my elders, is visible in the numbers. We talk about the $88 billion, $88 billion, lost annually to illicit flows. But historians and economists whisper of a deeper, darker figure, an estimated $1 trillion. $1 trillion in resources siphoned out of the continent in just the last 5 decades. Think on that figure. $1 trillion. That is enough, brothers and sisters, to fund universal education, to guarantee clean water, and to build the infrastructure necessary for generations to live in dignity and prosperity. To remain silent in the face of such structural dispossession, as Captain Traoré argued, would be to guarantee perpetual subjugation. And so, his defiance was not merely political rhetoric. It was an act of economic resistance. It was a categorical rejection of a global order where Africa's gold, oil, and uranium are treated as mere bargaining chips for someone else's stability and wealth. By refusing the implied threats, he was refusing to let Africa's future be mortgaged any longer. The reaction, thank God, was electric. The symbolism resonated. This message did not stay locked within the walls of a conference hall. It spread like wildfire, carried by the digital wind. In Lagos, radio hosts replayed the speech word for word, calling it the Sahel Doctrine. In Dar es Salaam, students carried banners that proclaimed, "Sovereignty is our wealth." Even here, in the diaspora, we felt the tremor. We must understand his calculation. The Western think tanks, they warned of sanctions, of aid suspensions, of credit ratings slashed. They whispered, "Be quiet, or you will pay a price." But the president of Burkina Faso flipped the script. He asked the deeper moral question: what is the price of silence? If Africa continues to bow, if Africa continues to compromise its voice, will it ever truly break free? The cost of speaking out may be high in the short term, but the cost of continued silence, my friends, is eternal subjugation. His words became a mirror, forcing the world to confront its hypocrisy. Why is it that sovereignty is sacred in Paris or Washington, untouchable and non-negotiable, but somehow it is deemed expendable and negotiable in Ouagadougou? Why are threats considered diplomacy when aimed at the South, but aggression when returned in kind? This defiance carried the weight of historical grief and resolve. Every phrase he spoke called up the memory of the partitioned maps, the forced labor, the pipelines that ran rich, while the villages remained poor. Brother Ibrahim turned silence, the very thing the manipulators expected, into the loudest form of protest. He summoned the memory of every ancestor who fought for self-determination. The challenge to every listener, both on the continent and abroad, was clear. When a continent finally declares, "We are sovereign," who among the powers will dare to say otherwise? That was the political declaration. But the strategic move was yet to come. The question now becomes, how do you turn a single powerful voice into an unbreakable chorus? When the pressure inevitably mounts, what unassailable shield can a continent forge to ensure that the words of the president of Burkina Faso are not just a spark, but the birth of a lasting, formidable, united front? My brothers and sisters, a powerful voice is a magnificent thing. But a powerful voice that inspires unity becomes an unassailable force. Captain Traoré had issued the political verdict. Now he delivered the strategic blueprint. The chamber held its breath, and in the silence, he delivered the line that will forever be carved into the modern history of the continent. He declared, "If you come for one of us, you come for all of us." Hallelujah! This was not mere rhetoric. It was the birth of the Sahel Alliance. This doctrine, my friends, is as potent and as revolutionary as any military pact or economic treaty ever signed in the West. For the first time since the colonial cartographers drew their arbitrary lines at the Berlin Conference of 1884, three nations, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, were declaring that their destinies were intertwined, not by external coercion, but by their own collective will. This declaration, brothers and sisters, speaks directly to our history of grief and regret. For decades, the outside powers maintained control by employing the oldest trick in the book: divide and conquer. They treated us as isolated entities, dealing with each nation bilaterally. A deal for gold here, a loan for oil there. This ensured that no single nation was ever strong enough to truly dictate terms. But the Sahel Alliance shatters that fragmentation. It is a social contract, an agreement to share intelligence, to pool energy resources, and to coordinate infrastructure, railways, fiber optic lines, and agricultural corridors designed to serve African needs, not European ports. Now, the cynics, and they are always present, my friends, will point to the numbers. They will say that the joint defense spending of this alliance is a mere $2.3 billion US, $2.3 billion annually, a fraction of NATO's staggering budget. But what they fail to calculate is the power of political will, coupled with unity. With 80 million citizens across this bloc, coupled with the strategic will of leaders who refuse to be bought, this alliance is powerful enough to deter external interference and rewrite the rules of engagement. Think of the economic impact, beloved. Together, these nations sit on some of the richest reserves of gold and uranium in the world, resources long tied up in Western contracts that siphoned billions into foreign banks. The Sahel Alliance positions itself not as a beggar at the gates of the IMF, but as a formidable trading bloc, capable of writing new terms. Analysts are already asking, could this be the next OPEC, but for Africa's minerals? This is the true power of Pan-Africanism today. The reverberations were immediate. On the continent, the support was overwhelming. Mali's Aimi Goita posted a clear statement: Africa will not bow. Guinea's Doumbouya followed suit. We stand with Traoré. These were not diplomatic niceties, but public endorsements that lent real political weight to the movement. Socially, the wave was immense. Hashtags like Africa will not boo and we stand with Traoré trended across platforms, uniting over 50 million impressions in less than 48 hours. In Accra, students painted murals. In Johannesburg, unions pledged solidarity. The message, echoing our own civil rights struggle, was clear. An injury to one is felt by all. Yet, this moment of unity, beautiful as it is, carries a historical burden and a grave warning. The question that should cause us a moment of regret is this: why did it take a threat from abroad to forge this necessary unity? Why did our leaders, for decades, choose the easy bilateral path over the hard road of collective sovereignty? The president of Burkina Faso understands this dilemma. Unity is powerful, but it is fragile. It can be bought, it can be divided, and it can be crushed. The real task is not the declaration. The real task is the implementation. Can these governments rise above their own internal divisions, resist the temptations of side deals, and convert this powerful phrase into durable, unbreakable policy? The table has been turned, my friends. Instead of Africa waiting for protection from abroad, waiting for the scraps of aid and the lopsided contracts, it is now projecting protection from within. That shift from dependency to deterrence is monumental. Now, as we reflect on this profound historical choice, I ask you, my cherished audience, to consider this. What is the most pressing step African nations must take right now, beyond the military pact, to solidify this Pan-African economic front? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your wisdom is the cornerstone of this movement. The world's powers, the architects of the old order, have taken note. They see the gold futures spike and the unity surge. But when those powers realize that Africa is no longer asking permission, how will they respond? Will they tolerate an Africa that no longer bends? Or will they unleash the full weight of their economic and political arsenal to crush this fragile dream of unity? Now, let us turn our gaze outward, my elders, away from the righteous fire of the Sahel and towards the distant capitals, Washington, Paris, Tel Aviv, and their response, or rather, their non-response. For seasoned observers of the global game, the absolute silence that followed Captain Traoré's thunderous warning spoke louder than any rebuttal. It was the calculated pause of a power structure caught off guard, a system that thrives on controlling the narrative. Think about it. Western outlets, those behemoths of global media, which are usually so quick to amplify every tremor in global politics, suddenly downplayed this monumental story. Headlines that should have filled front pages were intentionally pushed to the margins. Was it hesitation, or was it a deliberate omission, a coordinated attempt to starve this story of oxygen? This, my friends, is not just about Israel or the UN podium. This is about narrative power. Who gets to frame Africa's struggle? Who edits its dignity? Who decides what matters to the world? But thank God for the digital age. Africa, the new digital Africa, refused to be muted. Within hours, clips of Traoré's speech flooded X, Telegram, and WhatsApp, surging to over 10 million views in less than 48 hours. The hashtags, the digital montages, these became the new political currency. This was a generation of Africans writing their own story, refusing to let the editors in London or New York define their reality. And the message resonated deeply with us, the diaspora, the community here in the United States and across the world. When we heard Brother Ibrahim speak, it stirred the memory. It was the echo of our own civil rights struggle, the echoes of Marcus Garvey's vision, the echoes of the non-aligned movement of the 1960s. His demand for self-possession is simply a continuation of the eternal fight for black sovereignty, a universal plea for dignity and control of one's destiny. This is the very essence of Pan-Africanism today, the digital highway connecting Ouagadougou to Atlanta, ensuring that the dignity of the continent is no longer negotiable. When the diaspora communities here in New York and London rallied, they were asking the same fundamental question. If mainstream media won't tell the story, who gets to write history? Financial analysts in Wall Street and the City of London, they weren't silent. They were calculating. They saw gold futures spike. They saw investors whisper about resource nationalism. They asked if the Sahel Alliance could trigger a domino effect across Africa's $2.5 trillion economy. They understand that if Africa moves in concert, setting its own terms for cobalt, uranium, and oil, it doesn't just disrupt supply chains. It fundamentally challenges the global balance of power they have enjoyed for centuries. But here is the truth. Beloved, the risk for us, the risk for Africa, does not lie in this bold speech. The risk lies in letting the momentum fade. The powers that be are waiting, not to fight head-on, but to find new ways to divide, to corrupt, and to silence the continent once again. So, as this crucial wave of unity crests, we must ask ourselves, can a powerful symbol, one man's courageous words, be sustained by institutions, policies, and alliances strong enough to outlast the headlines? Or will this spark of magnificent defiance risk being extinguished if not guarded with unyielding vigilance and disciplined policy? The silence that followed. The president of Burkina Faso's declaration, "If you come for one of us, you come for all of us," was not an ending, but a new beginning. He did not stop at military pacts. He dared to paint a vivid, breathtaking picture of the future, a vision of a genuine Pan-African union, rooted not in begging for aid, but in self-reliance and dignity. Listen to the audacity of this vision, my friends, for it speaks directly to our hopes. He spoke of schools across Africa, teaching the true history, not the colonial, edited version, but the glory of Timbuktu's manuscripts, the wisdom of ancient empires that traded in gold and knowledge long before Europe's ascendancy. He spoke of hospitals, fully equipped, not for the elites, but for the ordinary mother in Ouagadougou or the child in Lagos, who could receive care without first being asked for dollars or euros. This vision, my elders, is fundamentally an economic one. It aims to redirect the estimated $88 billion US, 88 billion, that flee the continent annually due to illicit flows. Think of it. That is nearly the equivalent of the entire U.S. education budget. Brother Ibrahim's dream is to convert that leakage into the very lifeblood of the continent, financing innovation, healthcare, and infrastructure without foreign debt. He urged that the Sahel Alliance must evolve into a true Pan-African alliance, complete with shared defense, common markets, and, crucially, integrated infrastructure. Imagine a continental energy corridor, a Pan-African payment system free from the dictates of the IMF, and fiber optic highways carrying African data on African servers. Economists calculate that even a 10% increase in intra-African trade could generate $50 billion US, $50 billion annually, funds that could finance generations of progress. For the youth, this means jobs, not as migrants seeking scraps in foreign lands, but as builders of their own magnificent societies. For the diaspora, it is an invitation. Come home, not just with remittances, but with the skills and investments necessary to realize this dream. And for the elders, it is the profound assurance that the sacrifices of the independence struggles were not in vain. Critics, of course, dismiss this as utopia, painting it as reckless populism. But the president of Burkina Faso forces us to confront a vital choice. Is it more reckless to dream of self-reliance, or to continue a status quo that keeps 40% of the continent's population in poverty, despite holding 30% 30% of the world's mineral reserves? And then came his final ringing declaration, the powerful, simple statement that serves as the climax of this moment, a message to the old guard across the globe: your time is up. With every word, he forced the assembly to confront the choice. Will Africa's future be scripted in foreign capitals, or will it be finally, irrevocably, authored by African hands? The room may have fallen silent once more, but the echo of those final, definitive words refuses to fade. The era of silent compliance is over. But now comes the greatest risk. When a continent dares to speak this loudly, how long will it take for the powers accustomed to silence to unleash the full force of their historical instruments, to attempt to rewrite the ending? My cherished friends, my brothers and sisters, we have witnessed a moment where history was not merely documented. It was shouted into existence. We have tracked the defiant stand of Brother Ibrahim, the captain who became the voice of a continent, rejecting the centuries-old script of submission. His words, "We are not your colony. Your time is up," are not just political slogans. They are a profound theological statement on human dignity. They are the gospel of black sovereignty. For too long, beloved, Africa was told that freedom was granted, not claimed, that dignity was negotiable, not inherent. But Traoré's stance reframed the entire debate with a clarity that cuts through all the diplomatic fog. The real peril, he reminded us, does not lie in daring to speak truth to power. The real peril, the unforgivable sin, lies in surrender. Silence is the real risk. Think on that. A continent rich with gold, uranium, and the vibrant spirit of 1.4 billion people cannot afford the poverty of silence. Every silence has a cost. Every concession is a chain. From the colonial charters to the structural adjustment loans, the pattern is clear. Compromise your voice, and you compromise your future. This moment, this Sahel Alliance, this surging wave of Pan-Africanism today, is an invitation. It is an invitation to every classroom, every boardroom, and every household right here in the diaspora to participate in the making of a new African century. It challenges us to ask, what truth are we willing to defend? What silence are we willing to break? This fight for black sovereignty is universal. It is the core struggle for economic justice, for dignity that is self-determined, not externally validated. And the future is not a far-off dream, but a choice we make today. So, I ask you, my elders, what lesson from our own struggle for civil rights, for economic self-sufficiency here in America, must Africa embrace right now to ensure this new alliance endures? Leave your wisdom in the comments below, for your counsel is crucial. Friends, if you believe that dignity has no price, if you believe that freedom must be spoken into existence, if you believe in the promise of a continent finally taking charge of its own destiny and embracing true Pan-Africanism today, then I urge you, do not let this message fade into the noise. Share this video with 5 people who need to hear the sound of the chains breaking. Subscribe to this channel, not just as a viewer, but as an active participant in this global dialogue of liberation. And let us together ensure that the story of the next African century is finally, gloriously, written by African hands.